Welcome, everybody. I hope you're having a good day so far. We have a special report for you today about unlocking the mystery of the ISS, the International Space Station, which is a huge enigma when you really just sit down and think about the claims that they're making. And we have a really special guest with us here today. And in my opinion, one of the greatest minds on the internet, author of multiple thought-provoking books, founder of the auto-hoaxing school of mainstream media propaganda deconstruction, and expert researcher when it comes to this topic of ISS propaganda, Tim Ozman of the Infinite Plane Radio. Welcome, and how are you doing today, Tim?
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Tim Truth. I'm doing great. I've been very much looking forward to this talk because you and I have been having this conversation since, I'd say, October of 2019. And this is actually sort of going full circle with a lot of the things that we were looking at the time with regard to the space station and what I believe is the next 9/11 triggering event, which will bring about space wars. And it seems like a lot of the things we talked about then are extremely relevant right now as
Mm-hmm.
of this moment. For example, some recent headlines we could refer to where it seems like they're normalizing the notion that the space station is about to fall and it's going to come down in some burning, spectacular way.
Yes, and I think we just saw the patterns coming a little too soon, or not too soon, but it took a while for them to actually play out and manifest on this world stage. So I'm so glad you're here with us. Like you said, there's so many headlines popping up, and I feel like there's so many more after you and I scheduled this. Like I saw enough that I'm like, okay, we gotta reach out to Tim and see what he's up to and what his thoughts are about this. But then after we set this up like 2 days ago, I saw more and more headlines flooding out. So I definitely want to talk about this, and we are so glad to have one of the world experts on the ISS with us. You have been diligently archiving the propaganda and psychological prepping in regards to the ISS, amongst other topics. And I don't remember every claim you've made. I don't even know if I've watched enough of the videos to hear your entire thesis. But, reading the headlines lately, I think you definitely have a knack for forecasting the world stage propaganda campaigns. So, I know you've seen this coming a mile away. Let me start by asking, how did you get into researching the ISS? Like, when did it come across your radar? And what do you think is really going on with it? And what role do you think it plays on the world stage? Take your time. I know that's a lot to ask, but what are your thoughts on the ISS in general?
Sure. Let me go ahead and start with, I first started looking at the ISS critically when I came across the flat Earth theory, or flat Earth question. It's not even a model in my view, it's more of a question. And it's one of these things that gets you to challenge basic assumptions. So I started looking at the ISS with the eyes of someone who spent years doing Photoshop touch-up, sometimes professionally, a lot of video editing and digital artwork. So I consider myself to be very visually literate. In fact, I kind of quit film studies, which was one of my final majors, in disgust because I liked real props, real special effects, organic effects, and everything was going digital, and I thought it looked like garbage. So interestingly enough, recently I've been looking at articles from Douglas Trumbull, the special effects guru that worked with Kubrick, recently died, by the way, and he had the same observation. He said, if you look at Kubrick's films from decades ago and you compare them to stuff today, you'll find that they've aged a lot better, that CGI doesn't look good in a couple of years. And that's been the case with the ISS. So as a video editor, I'm looking at this thing critically, and there's something to the flat earthers' claims that it's some kind of basically a movie stage, kind of like Apollo 11 is believed to be. And I'm also of that opinion. I would say that it's a continuation of this ongoing process of simulating space travel, which that in itself is kind of a side topic, but I believe that the outer space journey, outer space travel is actually this replacement heaven for the world, for a world religion. So all the religions, no matter how they differ and fight over their versions of heaven, they all agree on outer space, which has been verified by science. And I see science as the dominant religion of the day. I mean, not the methodology, but this belief system that they label science. So anyway, when it comes to the space station being fake, there has to be, why are they faking it? And I figured one part of it is obviously this international. It's about unity and this one world system. And the more I analyze the symbolism within it, I can see that there's also this element of this is some kind of a Tower of Babel, uniting all mankind in a singular quest to go from Earth to the heavens, one language uniting the world, that being the internet. And this endeavor, this tower, the story seems to follow track with the biblical story where it falls. And so, what I've been looking at since 2019 is the story of this Tower of Babel, this world or global unity just falling to pieces. And this has been hinted at in many different ways in the movies, even with the dates of various movie tie-ins. And it goes pretty in depth when you get into the predictive programming. But my point is really here that I believe that the predictive programming is suggesting, just like it has with 9/11, that there's going to be another calamity that's going to be used to throw the world into chaos. And I believe that the space station is the next, I guess, iconic monument to take a hit. It's symbolic. So just as the Twin Towers falling symbolized, in my view, in many ways, America being brought to its knees. But with the space station, if they take this down, it will symbolize the dissolution of world cooperation, the scattering of the tongues, no more unity. And outer space being a shared heaven means we're no longer unified on this path up. And finally, this ties into this partisan divide, which is left, right, but also uh, freedom versus totally controlled, essentially command economy, communism, you could call it. But I'm saying that the final question here is, are we going into space as capitalists to bring our wealth down to Earth? Or are they going to lock us down and move us into this sustainable green world order before we go out there? And this is the divide between Russia and America, space communism and space capitalism. So anyway, my point being, again, to answer your question, the purpose of the space station is to unify us, and then they're going to divide us.
Wow, that's a great answer. And I know we could go in a million different directions here. But let's start with what they're claiming in the news right now as far as the headlines go. Here's Clean Technica from 13 hours ago, which coincidentally is after I announced that we'd have Tim Ozman with us talking about the ISS. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but this story is really developing quickly. If Russia decides to drop the ISS on us, SpaceX will save us. And it referred to this tweet, which I'm glad they brought this to my attention so I can run this by Tim. So this is somebody named Dmitry Rogozin, former deputy chairman of the government of the Russian Federation. And there's a series of tweets here, basically like, how dare you sanction us, and are you not going to cooperate with us on the ISS anymore? And then this is the key part here. It says, let's start with this tweet. I just want to get the full context here. This is how you already do it, by limiting exchanges between our cosmonaut and astronaut training centers. Or do you want to manage the ISS yourself? Maybe President Biden is off topic. So explain to him that the correction of the station's orbit, its avoidance of dangerous rendezvous with space garbage, with which your talented businessmen have polluted the near-Earth orbit, is produced exclusively by the engines of the Russian Progress MS cargo ships. If you block cooperation with us, who will save the ISS from an uncontrolled deorbit and fall into the United States, or, we got to finish the sentence, or Europe? Okay, so first thoughts, Tim. What's going through your mind?
Okay, first of all, they're scapegoating Musk. So here you have it. It's the capitalists causing the problem. And when we talk about predictive programming and the setup for this, we've been inundated with images of stuff falling from the sky. Moonfall, Don't Look Up, about a dozen Netflix TV shows I could name, and specific episodes I could name, that actually show falling space stations representing like, for example, in the show The 100 on Netflix, on season 1, episode 13, and note the numbers 113, the space station falls, and the space station is comprised of 13 stations, one for each of the nations. So it's a dissolution of this unity of these 13 nations. But again, season 1, episode 13, space station falls. In the episode, you have a Tower of Babel painting in a bunker on the ground. And that episode, again, this is from the 100, I believe is preparing us for something falling. So they've been getting us visually prepared for it, like giving us the imagery in our minds so that we know what it would look like, because it's something that many people have not conceptualized. And this talk about the dissolution between the Russians and the Americans started more than a year ago. And it had to do with other things. Like it seemed almost like there was some kind of bickering up there. And they said at the time, this was last summer, that there were actually cracks in the ISS. So I took that to mean, as I do this propaganda analysis, that this crack is actually along the lines of this greater schism
Hmm.
that is being split down the world. And this phrase, the Kraken, I think is very relevant. And I think it does relate to the bigger storyline here. The Kraken is the beast that was created by Pluto or Hades. And we just had the Pluto return to the position, the conjunct that it was in during the 1776 American Revolution. So I was looking at this crack in the space station story as foreshadowing. And now we're seeing that that foreshadowing was indeed pointing to something. But what I want to point out here, though, is that the number 113, that date, that number is very significant, and that's the reason why I said we need to start at 113. So really quick here, everyone knows the Challenger explosion. You've all seen it. It's been embedded into your mind. You didn't watch it live, no matter what your teachers told you. They just brought it out to traumatize you. But it blew up at 1 minute 13 seconds. Now you go back to the Apollo 13. There's that number 13. That Apollo 13 blew up at 113. So the number 13 is the number of the Phoenix, death and resurrection. So then we get into the Twin Towers. They were burned down, and the new tower was erected 13 years later. There's that number again. And they opened it up on the date of 11/3. So that number is consistently used with 9/11 and the space program. And I had to point this out because there is a continuity here. And 9/11 is not separate from the Challenger explosion, is not separate from the space station falling, in my view. I think everything we see with these major psyops can indicate that they're all interconnected, and it's given away specifically in the symbolism. So just pointing that out, 1313 or 113, it ties 9/11 to the Challenger to Apollo 13, among other things.
Fascinating. And is it a coincidence? I know we've talked about this before, that these solar panels are in the shape of the Twin Towers.
Oh, you got to look at a recent article in Futurism that I had pointed out where they had the space station in flames. And if you zoom in on the solar panels, it's indistinguishable from looking at the burning Twin Towers. And this is the thing I'm suggesting here, and I think this is actually given away in a number of movies, specifically Kubrick's films. I believe that they have used architecture to convey what's coming. So, for example, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York has images of New York being bowled over by a tidal wave, and you have the Twin Towers falling. Well, that I would suggest is foreshadowing, predictive programming, and it's describing the city of New York as, Babylon about to fall. So this is again just stuff that we can point to show that there's a bigger story being told if you can read between the lines. And
Mhm.
one other thing, the numerology has given this away,
Mhm.
that the number 42, 33, these are constant numbers that we see. Everybody who's looked at conspiracies notice 33. The Twin Towers were 33 years old when they were burned. But the number 42 has been specifically used with the space program. Just look up Elon Musk and 42, you'll see it's all over. The number 42 is usually pertains to things falling, whereas 33, rising sun, 42 is associated with Saturn and the nightfall, or things actually falling. Consistent symbology here. So in 1979, Skylab fell on 7/11. So what I had posited here was based on a lot of these, and I can go through this stuff in detail later, but the big picture here is I was looking at a lot of stuff suggesting that 42 years after Skylab, we would have a commensurate disaster. Stuff would start falling from the sky. And exactly 42 years later, that's exactly what has happened. It has started with the Chinese space junk, and then you have the space junk actually hitting the space station. And on the anniversary of Skylab falling, you have the space plane of Richard Branson going into space. And the space plane has very specific 9/11 space station connections here, which we can get into later.
Can
And
I add
finally,
one?
9 days
Before you
later,
finish up, I just want to add one.
yes,
ISS is 911. If you just look at the alphabetic order, so I is the ninth letter, S is the 19th letter, and if you reduce the digits, it goes to 10, then reduce it again, it goes to 1. So under this cipher called full reduction, ISS is 911. Do you think that's a coincidence, or do you think they're encoding it into the name as well?
that's not a coincidence at all. And 9 days after the 42nd anniversary of Skylab falling, you had the Jeff Bezos launch into space, and he launched at 9:11 a.m. on the anniversary of Apollo 11.
Wow.
So 9:11 a.m., not a coincidence. There are connections here that show that it is that integrated, where ISS equaling 9/11, it matters because they're telling the same story. And look at the Roman numerals for 9/11. You get
IXXI.
IX, XI.
Yeah.
You put them together and you get twin pillars with a cube in the middle, or twin pillars with the unicursal hexagram, the six-pointed star.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same ritual and it's all interconnected. So yeah, I would say 100% ISS equals 9/11. And there's a few other things too. ISS, very phonetically similar to Isis,
Yeah.
goddess of the night sky. It serves a function as the temple of Isis, the counterpart to the phallic earth god. So you have the rocket below and the goddess of the night above. And when they meet up, they uh, basically conceive the sun for the next day. That's their basic occult ritual. But in the New Age system of magic, you can look at Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, Aleister Crowley. They renamed Isis into Babylon. So this to me stands out as well because we're comparing the ISS to the Tower of Babel and the goddess having been renamed. There's a storyline here that has to do with Babylon falling or
Wow.
Babylon burning. And I've been talking about this symbol of the phoenix and the burning
Mm-hmm.
man. And the guy that set himself on fire, who happened to be 33 years old, he set himself on fire in 2019 in front of the White House wearing a USA shirt. And that to me was hinting USA is going to burn. And this was in 2019. Shortly after that, right after the solstice, there was a big phoenix spotted above a Russian power base, closed power station. So I'm seeing Russia, Phoenix, burning USA. And at that same time, a movie was out called Dark Phoenix that had $33 million at its opening. And the Dark Phoenix movie's posters has burning space shuttles. So you have Challenger reference. So I was saying, looking at this, and this is right after, of course, the Notre Dame, Our Lady, another ISIS reference, was burning.
Right.
So we had burning ISIS,
Wow.
burning USA, Phoenix in the sky, Russian power station, along with the solstice, and about 5 other astrological alignments, but all pointing to there's going to be another Challenger explosion. The Challenger will be destroyed again. And that's where this started in 2019. And that's what I've been following with the space station ever since.
Wow. Yeah, and that's what I was going to actually ask you about next, is you've been following this almost obsessively for years and years and years, I would say. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you check this all the time. You're on top of all of this, and you read it as if it's propaganda, as if it's a contrived story that they're teaching, that they're telling through, contrived news events. So I'm so glad to have you with us. And yeah, you're on point. Everything you just said really resonates with me. So we're seeing these headlines like this one here. This is Politico. Russian crisis could sink the International Space Station. So there's this idea that Russia could just go hands off and not help with their cargo ships anymore. And like you said, it might be the capitalist Musk coming and saving the day, as we see here. In response to that post, apparently Elon Musk replied with an image of the SpaceX logo. So what I wanted to ask you next is, how do you see the ISS coming down? Because there's also news stories. Well, this one says NASA can run International Space Station solo if Russia pulls out, experts say. So there's like some question as to whether the United States could go it alone or if they need Russia. And then they're also talking about by 2031 retiring it anyway. So how do you see this coming down if you had to forecast it?
Okay, so this is where it gets interestingly tied in to this idea of metascript. So you described how I look at the news like it's a story unfolding. And so when I say metascript, it's a script, but it's not just on one news network. It's on everything. The Gestalt, the big echo chamber from MSM is telling a big story that paints our zeitgeist in a certain way. So I've been reading that starting at the 42-year mark, the space station would start, there would be some drama up there. And in the last 6 months, it's dodged Chinese space junk twice. China claims they dodged CubeSats twice. And as I suggested that CubeSats would start falling at this time, 40 CubeSats fell like a month ago. But dodging space junk has become a thing. And on their mission Celestial Immunity, the arm of the space station was hit by a piece of space junk. It was vaxxed. So this is all new stuff. But again, I'm looking at this thing as it's a story unfolding. So then I look into Stanley Kubrick's suspected role in Apollo 11 and his suspected role in 9/11. And a lot of interesting things have come up combining these two ideas lately. So for example, Bezos launched at 9:11 a.m. on the anniversary of Apollo 11. Well, if you put these numbers together, A119 was a 1958 Air Force secret mission to nuke the moon. And this ties in to this movie Moonfall, which they were almost going to nuke the moon. So Moonfall and Don't Look Up are two movies that have made it very clear that it's the capitalist that will destroy the world, and we have to let the scientists speak for us, that we're not listening to the Noahs of our day. Leonardo DiCaprio in Don't Look Up was portrayed as something of a Noah, warning the world of our wickedness, not our wickedness, but of the error of our ways by not listening to science is going to doom us. And they chose him because he's the face of the Titanic. The Titanic is a metaphor for the West, and the comet is just a space iceberg. So the West is going to sink. That's what has been conveyed again and again here, that it's space communism versus space capitalism. And the capitalist, like Jeff Bezos, is very publicly flaunting his wealth on his mega yacht. And so is Leonardo DiCaprio out there on their mega yachts. That's to imply Titanic. And the Titanic's about to take a hit. So my read on this thing with Russia's involvement is this. The Stanley Kubrick's suspected involvement with all of this, Apollo 11 and the 9/11 foreshadowing, it makes use of something in Space Odyssey. It's a space plane that arrives at the twin-cylindered space station, and it looks very much like Flight 175 heading towards the tower. So it's kind of there conveying, as in Stanley Kubrick was conveying here, that there's going to be a space 9/11, which this ties into Richard Branson sending his space plane up on the 42nd anniversary of Skylab falling, and then 9 days later, the 9/11 launch. So I'm suggesting that Kubrick's film was foreshadowing this 9/11 from space, and for me, it's just a question of who's going to do it, who's going to shoot it down. And there's been a number of instances that suggest that it could be either China or Russia. China has its own station. And of course, the narrative buildup has been, as I said, 2019, even with the Phoenix over the Russian power station, that Russia would be the thing to burn the US. And so I'm suggesting that Russia is probably going to do something, not accidentally, but where they have plausible deniability, but maybe some kind of a space weapon. And finally, on the 4th, on 3/4, some large object scheduled to hit the moon. China's denied it's theirs. Musk has denied it's his. So I'm like, could that be some kind of secret Russian space weapon about to impact?
It's interesting. This article here is basically saying Russia might stop helping the ISS stay in orbit, which we should probably talk about what we think the ISS really is. I want to hear what you think about that. But this article is really making me laugh because they're framing it like if Russia stopped helping keeping it in orbit, that's them deciding to drop it on us. And then down here it says, if Russia does decide to drop the ISS on our heads, I'm grateful that Elon Musk and SpaceX have offered to help with that issue. It's just like it's so contrived. And before we get into, I want to ask you about the impacts as far as the Russian conflict that we're seeing, because you've been calling this for years now. And also the story that you brought to my attention about the Russians drinking filtered American pee. And I want to pick your brain about that. But before we do, let's talk about what do you think the ISS really is, and can you tell us a little bit about NASA and ISS movie magic? If you think they're
Sure.
counterfeiting their footage.
And for people who don't know, the ISS is orbiting the Earth at 17,500 miles per hour, and it remains in this perfect orbit so long as it gets an occasional booster. Like a rocket needs to go up with the supply, so they bring up the monkey suits, the guitars, the MREs, and when it docks with the space station, that little bump is what keeps the thing in orbit. So the idea that if Russia decides not to send up the bumps, it's just going to fall, is what they're actually talking about. They're suggesting that Russia will just let it just burn up in the atmosphere and perhaps let it drop, this 500-ton piece of work. And so, first of all, to make it clear, I don't believe it's actually up there. It's an impossibility. But I just noticed these stories, like in 2019, there was a drill for a falling object over New York. And in 2020, there was almost a near hit. There was a near miss. And then a year later, same thing with China. So what I'm saying here is I think the ISS is a psychological operation in progress. It's a 22-year so far long movie, but I think it's part of this space program where they're incrementally moving us into the space age. So first it was getting us into space. Then it was getting us onto the moon. Then it's this phase now, mastering low Earth orbit, creating these lunar gates. And the next stage after this is when we actually start colonizing the moon and then Mars. So I think that this is all just a psyop to get a generation acclimated to the idea that we're already in space all the time, that we're always there, and we're just going deeper and deeper. So again, I think this is a psyop to get us closer to accepting space travel, which I believe they could easily simulate.
Right, and get people thinking they're going off to space, but maybe send them to some other kind of camp where they might be doing slave labor.
Yeah, exactly. What if the Mars ships are actually slave ships and you're hyperlooping to some gulag deep beneath the Earth? You're not going to know the difference. And I think that this has actually been hinted at, and it's kind of a dark picture that's been painted, but it's far more likely that they're sending you to some dungeon beneath the ground than they're going to send you to some paradise in the sky, millions of miles away.
So I like to think about their claims that they're making here at the ISS. They said they built this in the sky, and I liked how you put it. I think I remember you saying it's like they're claiming that they built a castle in the sky, and they keep it maintained up there. Is that the phrase that you've used, castle in the sky?
Yeah, it's a castle in the sky, and it's an impossible thing. I
Like
believe
you
what
said,
they've
going
given.
17,500 miles per hour, and they just keep it up there. It's an impossibility as far as I'm concerned as well. But
And what's more,
go ahead.
it gives them this view where they claim, and this is the new priesthood. They go up there and they say, I've had a cognitive shift. I've had the overview effect. I've seen the whole Earth. Now I'm an environmentalist and I don't believe in national boundaries. So they've used the ISS as actually a temple. This is its real
Mhm.
purpose, aside from the space program and this advance into the new age. Another purpose is to establish an actual high priesthood. They're elevated and they are able to claim such.
That's fascinating. So, how do they pull this off? Because people are going to say, no, it's up there. We can see these videos of it going across the moon. We can track it on our app and see a light up in the sky. Is this just, shadows on the cave wall to make us believe something's up there as part of the mythology? Or is
Yes,
that even faked as well?
absolutely. Absolutely. Plato's cave, and everything about it is fakeable. We have to say that. If people say it's on my app, well, Pokemon's on your app. Are you saying Pokemon's outside? So we have to understand that everything that they present to us is fakeable. And look, a lot of people, maybe it's not lie, but they'll confabulate. People will say that they met an angel or they saw God or something, and it may just be a bit of an exaggeration. So people will say, I saw a light. I think I saw it. And most people don't know that once it passes sunset, the Terminator line, it enters Earth's shadow. So you would not be able to see any low Earth orbit object within the umbra of Earth's shadow, which goes out into space 870,000 miles. So people who are claiming that they're seeing the space station over their head at night, they can't. And most don't know. So I think it's just a misconception that it's up there. And then when you look at the hows of it, well, one, movie magic, everything they can fake in the movies. Look at the back behind the scenes from the movie Inception, where you can have these movie sets where people are floating around and rotating. Super easy to do. And then the actual spacewalks are clearly done underwater. And all of the evidence you need for that, look at the lighting. The lighting outside the space station is always diffused when they're on these spacewalks and they're moving all slow. But when you look out the window of the space station, it's crystal clear. And you can see the Earth, you can see shadows of clouds, you can see so much detail. And I'm like, why is it so super clear when I'm looking out from the photography of, for example, from Starman's point of view, from the Tesla Roadster, space is so clear. But then look at a spacewalk and it looks like underwater. And just compare underwater uh, lighting, like on an oil rig or something, just find a video and compare it to the spacewalks. So yes, they're faking the spacewalks in the place where they do their training, the desalinated pools, and the other part of it's just filmed in a studio, likely in New Orleans, but it's a film studio. It's not, it's beyond, there's still low grade green screen, but the future of the space program is going to be these surround LED screens. They're going past green screen. So we have to call out the glitches while we still can.
Right. They're getting better. Well, what would you provide as some evidence that they are faking the footage? Because if any of it's faked, and I've seen a lot of evidence that a lot of it's faked, well, I've seen enough evidence that they faked enough that it should raise alarms. You know, why are they faking footage if they're really floating around in zero G? I wanted to ask you about that, but I also wanted to point out real quick, isn't it interesting how nonchalant they are? Like they didn't just take a rocket ship off of the Earth and dock with something up in the sky, a castle in the sky going 17,500 miles per hour, and they just like play soccer and like squirt water around. It doesn't make any sense. Like they're so careless and they don't take it seriously as they should, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on the faking of this with the movie magic and the maybe augmented 3D CGI and the green screening and the harnesses and stuff? What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, well, for one, you're right about this. They're super nonchalant. We're talking about a dangerous work environment, and they're goofing around, playing soccer, putting on monkey suits. You would think they'd be afraid for their lives because they're hurling around the earth, but it's too perfect. I think it's too perfect, and they're intentionally being minimalistic. The thing doesn't rock, it doesn't tilt. It's too perfectly still, in my opinion.
Right.
And something else too is they fake stuff all the time, but their graphics, like that Douglas Trumbull had said, CGI doesn't age well. If you look at the footage from 2015, compare it to 2010, 2005, and then compare it to the recent stuff, you can see that outer space and the way that the human body moves in outer space seemingly changes along with our ability to simulate it. So it's like the special effects are getting better. And it's like space should always look the same, no matter what you're using to film it. So there's some dead giveaways, but I would point to green screen glitches. There's some instances where they're using augmented virtual reality, where they are looking through on a screen or through lenses, they can see these 3D objects floating around. The director doesn't see them unless he's looking through the camera. So you're looking at augmented virtual reality objects that aren't really there, where the astronauts are constantly, I guess, misjudging exactly where their hand should be. And you'll see their hands going through microphones, microphones going through necks. And I'll have to assemble a lot of these in short clips so people can actually go through them. We also have instances of astronauts being interviewed by students on the ground where you can hear the director talking to the astronaut, but he's on the same movie set. We have dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of glitches that clearly give it away. And I also want to point out, before the flat Earth topic ever emerged, like you can find articles, you can find on various websites as early as 2012, where people were looking at ISS Photoshop and recognizing it as such. You can find discrepancies in how the Earth looks from space across
Right.
various pictures, where sometimes you can tell that they use the wrong pictures, they're too close to the Earth, too far. But anyway, I'd say it's self-debunking for anybody who knows what they're looking at.
Right. It is. It's crazy when people point this out You can see like their shirt getting pulled back by the harness. I have a couple here. It's just like here, this guy gets like his harness hooked, and they're all looking right at his harness where he's having issue, and he's like pulling on the wire or something. It just seems obvious to me, and I don't know why people can't see it. And then that combined with the extraordinary claims that they're making is about like how they're docking with this ISS and keeping it up in orbit for all this time. What did you say, like 20 years now? It's
Yeah, 22 years.
it's really hard to believe that all of this isn't anything other than, a fake, a fraud. So that's how I look at it.
And something else I wanted to bring up here, as far as like why bring it, I've been suggesting here the reason why they have to bring it down is there's two reasons. One, the CGI is just terrible, and there's new CGI, and you can't just go from looking as it looks now, where these guys are obviously dangling from harnesses, to floating around effortlessly like Sandra Bullock. You can't make that leap in the same craft. It would
Right.
be too great a leap. So I've been saying that one of the limiting factors is CGI when it comes to space travel, and they can't move us to the moon bases until they've brought this monstrosity down. And I think that's why they keep it minimalistic, because they have to phase it out, and they're no longer going to use green screen and harnesses. They have more sophisticated ways of faking space. So I think it has to go for that reason. And then also, I've noticed that with the space program, at every major leap, there has been specifically a fiery explosion, a fiery immolation. The first guy to go in space, Yuri Gagarin, mysterious fiery explosion when he was flying. Jack Parsons before him, mysterious fiery explosion. Apollo 1, mysterious fiery explosion. Challenger. And I'm suggesting here, in fact, let me read this line from the author William Cooper. He says that there's this symbolic language that you can read in the names of the space shuttles, where he says, it's a Columbian enterprise to endeavor for the discovery of Atlantis, and all challengers will be destroyed. So, taking that perspective, the Challenger, in my view, from my reading of the symbolism, is what is constantly being destroyed and coming back. It represents the sun god, the sun. And the sun is always destroyed, and then it regenerates. And so I'm thinking every phase of the space program has involved some kind of sun god death and rebirth. Yuri Gagarin's death, in many ways, mimicked the ritualistic death of Osiris, where they couldn't find his parts. Apollo, sun god name. So it's consistent. So I'm just suggesting that to fit the pattern, to move to the next phase of the space program, to actually go into lunar colonization, I think we're due for another fiery sacrifice. And it just so happens that if the space station were to fall, it would quite literally burn up.
Wow. Well, I've got some questions I want to ask you about Russia. But before we do, let me ask you about 9/11, because I remember you have a pretty extreme stance on it, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but you take it further than most as far as how faked it was. Can you give us like an elevator pitch on what you think happened on 9/11? I'm just so curious because
Sure.
I am obsessed with this topic.
Yeah, same here. Okay, so 9/11, the mega ritual was planned from the time that the buildings were built, even before, in my opinion. I think there's a correlation between the use of 911 as an emergency number starting in 1968, and that being the year of the Twin Towers construction beginning. It's not a coincidence that the Pentagon's construction began on a 9/11. That date is the New Year in the Coptic New Year. It's a very symbolic occult date. So I think that this is more ritual than anything, more than a geopolitical attack. And moreover, I don't even think it necessitates that people actually died. And when I get into the metascript concept, it seems clear that a lot of what we saw that day was actually scripted and directed by Stanley Kubrick. And so what I'm suggesting here is that what we're looking at is not merely a false flag, somebody pretending to be Islamists or actually Islamic terrorists attacking us. I'm suggesting that this is an alchemical ritual that was predicted in Space Odyssey 2001, which is all reference to two into one. It's the alchemical processing of mankind into this one world order. And that's why we have the two towers replaced by the One World Tower, which originally was going to be called the World Trade Center
Phoenix.
Phoenix.
Yep. Or
And
the
again,
Trump twin.
when you look at
It was also called the Trump Twin Towers, or the what do you? It was like the Trump World Trade Center
yes,
or something. The Phoenix. Yeah, you're right.
Trump's all over it. So when you look at the opening date and then the 13 years after the 33-year construction to destruction cycle, I think there's so much here pointing at this being an occult Masonic ritual, however you want to define it, Masonic, Illuminati, whatever, that it's beyond just a political thing. So were there victims of 9/11? In my view, everybody who watched it is a victim in the Psywar. So they give you a story. This is the victimizer, these are the victims, and we are witnesses. And I'm suggesting no, that the victimizer is the monolithic media that is using the media as a de facto state church, and the victims are the victims of the mass trauma-induced mind control. And I think that's what we're looking at here. I think that Corona, for example, was a continuation of the same storyline. I think that, like, here, let me throw this out really quick because 9/11, this ties into it. The number 19, 19 hijackers. You could say that 9/11 was another Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was originally called Operation AI. AI is 19. 19 years after 9/11, COVID-19. And now after COVID-19, we have the Great Reset, and now they're bringing about Gaia, the global AI initiative and alliance, which is basically AI 19. So the number 19 is constantly being used with these resetting events. And these events are all connected through the numerology. Pearl Harbor was on 12/7. On
Right.
9/11, you had building 1, building 2, and building 7. So
Moderna.
again,
They isn't their vaccine called like mRNA 1273 for the Moderna vax.
I think
So
you're,
tying that in as well. Go ahead.
yep. No, they all literally tie in like this. And so the more I'm seeing how these things are integrated, and then also, I mean, it goes into, for example, they phased out the Quran radicals and replacing with the QAnon radicals. So when you look at the templating of these psyops and the structure of it, aside from just the ritual, there's so much planning that I don't look at these things as terror attacks. So again, yeah, I could say that my view on 9/11 is extreme. I'm saying that they manufactured fake victims and they made victims out of every single person. If you consider a mind controlled subject to be a victim, if somebody has Stockholm syndrome, are they a victim? And so I'd say, yeah, in a sense, we are collectively, we are like, I guess you could say Stockholm syndrome, and that we are, of course, a captive audience.
Right. Yep. Well, let me ask you real quick before we transition to Russia, which I think is very interesting to look at through your analysis of the propaganda over the years, because you've been pointing at this for a while, and then all of a sudden Russia comes out on the scene like they've got a vengeance and they're gonna nuke us all, and just like this really escalated quickly, as you predicted. You saw this coming a mile away. But you know, when I think about 9/11, I think it has to do with this Bible verse. And then when I see that ISS also means 9/11, I think about this Bible verse. And I don't know if we differ about how important you think this is to the story, so I wanted to ask, but this is the Bible verse, Revelation 9:11. They had as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon. And Abaddon, I believe, locked up Satan for 1,000 years in hell. So it's a separate deity, it's a separate entity, according to the Bible, than Satan. So what are your thoughts on this Bible verse? Am I barking up the wrong tree, do you think?
I don't think you are. You can also find something with Revelation 3:11 and a reference to a crown, and we get corona. And also flip it, because with this numerology, you'll note that 9/11 and 119 are often used interchangeably. And I look at Genesis 119, you find a reference to the Tower of Babel falling. And 119 is the release date of Donnie Darko, a movie with many 9/11 tie-ins and stuff falling from the sky. In fact, the promotional material for Donnie Darko was problematic, and a lot of it had to be scrapped because it was plane parts falling from the sky, and it's just a post 9/11 movie. 119 is also the date that patient zero came down with COVID here in America. So yeah, these numbers do mean something. And also on this note, 9/11 is one event that uses these numbers, but you could look at other events that were 9/11ings of America, like when Derek Chauvin kneeled on George Floyd for 8:46. Well, 9/11 started at 8:46. The sun set in the Twin Cities at 8:46 that day. So you got the twins, 8:46, and this 9/11ing of America committed after the guy takes a $20 bill, which means 20 means twin tens, another twin reference, and this is right after Gemini kicks in. And it's a counterfeit bill, which makes it a twin. And on the back of the 20, you got the Twin Towers burning. So these are super integrated events. And then you can even look back at Rodney King. He was beaten for 1 minute and 19 seconds.
Wow.
And do you want to guess how many times Rodney King was hit? And the
How
name
many?
King, all this stuff is
Wow.
33 times.
Well,
33
his name
times he
was
was hit.
King too, and it comes back to that Bible verse. But I know you have a whole other line of thought on that as well, with the ritual of the murder of the king. Is that right? I'm sure I'm getting it a little bit wrong. Can you bring us
No,
up
you
to
got
speed?
it. You got it. There's so
And
when
that's
you look at this
JFK, that's
symbol,
MLK, etc. Right?
exactly,
Wow.
they tie them, they integrated them. So for example, the George Floyd Act was initially passed on the 30th anniversary of the Rodney King beating, and look, these numbers are super consistent. So I don't claim to know numerology, but in their usage, you will see the number 33 associated with Phoenix, King, Christ, and this dying and resurrecting Sun King is this
And is that
constant
666?
theme we're seeing.
Is that 666 as well? At all?
Yeah, I see the 666 meaning the same thing more or less. Although actually, it's more like this: the 666 seems to be usually reference to world order, but yeah, it's the Sun King reference. It's actually the same basic set of symbols. 42 seems to signify Saturn, and I noted that the number four, when you get into the origin of these letters and numbers, the number four is a cross, the four seasons. So Saturn's an agrarian deity, a god of cycles and harvesting. That's where you get the Grim Reaper, the death, and the scythe. The number two looks something like a reversed S. And if you look at the symbol of Saturn, you can take a four and a two and you can recreate it. That's my point here. The two is the side, the four is the cross, the symbol of Saturn. And so what I'm suggesting is that in many of these psyops, and specifically the racial psyops, the black versus white, you will see the number 42 associated with the black side. And that's referencing Saturn. And it's this duality between Saturn and the sun, dark and light. And it's not about race. It's a masquerade for the alchemy. That's what they're using it for. Just like you'll see politics will often use some political identity group, and it's like they don't really care about that group. It's about their agenda. They don't care about the environment. It's about installing a communist dictatorship. So my point being, the number 42 is always used in these racial psyops, and you'll see it super obvious. And it was really clear in 2020, the week of the Kenosha riots. It was Mamba Week, celebrating the 42nd anniversary of Kobe Bryant posthumously, who was interviewed, his final interview on Earth, by Stephen Jackson, the 42-year-old, quote, twin of George Floyd. But anyway, this numerical patterning with these events is super consistent. Even Derek Chauvin's verdict was read on 4/20. Those are 42. They only allowed, and it was 330 days after he killed Floyd, and they only allowed 33 in the courtroom. Like, it's so consistent across the board. So my point being, 9/11 is code for these major transformative psyops, but it's not merely limited to that one particular event.
Wow. And I have some questions I still want to ask, but I want to give you the floor if you want to tell us a little bit about the connections you've drawn between Kubrick and 9/11 and possibly other major events. I think that's one of the most interesting things that you decode. And is this also, by the way, let me plug your book. You have a book out called The Metascript, and people can go to themetascript.com, or if you want to listen, or if you want to listen to Tim Ozman, you can go to infiniteplane.radio for links to where you can listen live. One of the best channels, in my opinion, massively underrated, probably because of how much censorship he's endured. But is that in your book, The Metascript? Can you tell us a little bit about Stanley Kubrick and how you see him fitting in?
Yes, and I appreciate the plug here. So the book, The Metascript Decoded, which I'm going to update it, but I had to put it out at when I did, because I realized that we're closing in on year 42, and I'm making some bold claims based on patterns. And I'm not trying to be a prophet here. I'm not trying to predict future. I'm suggesting that the major world stage events have been largely scripted decades in advance. And so I refer to the directors on the world stage as metascriptors. And I could list a number of people who have uncannily predicted all of the major psyops. Like we're living in a Tom Clancy novel, it seems like all the time. And the same could be said for Stanley Kubrick. So there's this long going conspiracy theory he directed the moon landing, and that is a misinformation line. The real suggestion here is that over there at PSYOP Entertainment Central, where they manufacture the fake news, somewhere there's some department where all of the great minds figure out how they're going to pull these things off. So there must be a group of people. So I look at Stanley Kubrick as just one person who is part of a bigger operation, not some rogue director that was drafted for a one-time gig. Because I'm suggesting that Kubrick's involvement extends beyond merely Apollo 11, but that he had a role in previous events, likely, in fact, almost certainly the JFK assassination. And it's given away in all of his books, his movies. Now, I would recommend that people go to chartword.com and just search JFK to get a start on this. But a couple of examples, some undeniable things. So at Ground Zero, there is the hotel known as the Millennium Hilton. The Hilton was specifically designed to resemble the monolith
Yep.
from 2001 Space, which came out in 68. So 33 years later, that monolith is overlooking Ground Zero, where the attacks actually happened. Now, in the movie The Shining, we can all remember Danny zipping down the hallways in his tricycle. Well, there's a scene where he's going towards the twins, who were not twins in the original script. So Kubrick made them twins. When he passes them, they're on the ground and everything's bloody. They're ripped in the middle, and there's a fireman's axe by them, foreshadowing 9/11 and the Twin Towers. The next scene, Danny's throwing darts. The twins walk in, and they're standing next to a phone booth. That's the Bell telephone booth. Well, the Twin Towers were next to the Bell telephone tower. So they actually recreated with the twins and the phone booth and Danny a Ground Zero event with the projectiles. Many little hints like this throughout The Shining, but in Space Odyssey 2001, it gets even more, I'd say, predictive of 9/11. And I referenced this earlier where there's a scene in 2001 which has a plane approaching the twin towers of the space station, and it looks very much like the same person framed the shot for the iconic image of Flight 175 heading towards the South Tower. And this idea of a space plane sounds preposterous, but then again, on the 42nd anniversary of Skylab, as I said, Branson sent a quote space plane, and his space plane, by the way, Virgin, replete with occult symbolism. Virgin is ISIS, and of course, it's launched up between two rockets called the White Knight twins. So you got these twin rockets launching the space plane. Again, foreshadowing. Not a coincidence, again, that Bezos 9 days later launched at 9:11 a.m. And Bezos, let me point this out too, because this is all part of the same story. Bezos had stepped down from Amazon last year on the 33rd day of the year, being February 2nd. So here he is, King Bezos, 57 years old, going to poke his head into the heavens. Well, what he represents, the guy on the Titanic, and then his cowboy hat going to space, he represents the space capitalist, the space cowboy, space as a frontier to exploit. So he's representing the problem here, the Tower of Babel that's too big, it's going to fall. So Amazon, A to Z, go into space. It's all very symbolic. And then the Amazon headquarters, they put the designs out for, resemble this old painting of the Tower of Babel. It's the Helix buildings. So these are these are intentional connections that have been made. So again, Kubrick also has a scene worth looking at in his movie Dr. Strangelove, which is about a low-level attack mission with an airplane. And so you have this airplane on a low-level flight, much like Flight 77. And even within that movie, there are some other hints suggesting 9/11, as in the numerology in the movie. So I'm suggesting that Kubrick's involvement as a meta scripter connects him to JFK, Apollo 11, 9/11, even Corona is hinted at in 2001: A Space Odyssey, even a mention of Floyd and a fake pandemic. And of course, I think that he's connected to whatever comes next. I don't think he's alive, but I think that Kubrick's scripting is going to be apparent in the next event.
Fascinating, fascinating. And when they put these out there, I'm thinking back about that movie. What was it? Room 237, which had a lot of really interesting points in it. I'm sure you know the movie I'm talking about, right?
Oh, yes, yes, the
Do,
documentary Room 237.
yeah, yeah. Do you more or less agree with their conclusions, or do you think they brought up some good points, but maybe missed the mark? And also, why would he come out and tell us things like for example, that phrase that he's typing on the typewriter over and over again? I don't know if that was in the King book or not. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, but it was typed with A11, so like Apollo 11, the name of the moon mission. So why would he put this type of stuff in his art? Was he trying to kind of sign off? I don't know. What do you think
Right.
about that?
Okay, so I've seen the documentary Room 237, and this is the movie where they correlated Room 237 in the Overlook Hotel with the moon room, and that Jack Nicholson freaking out over the Apollo 11, or rather the script, he freaks out and he writes down all work, no play, and that's a reference to Apollo 11. But the theory here is that he's showing how he is keeping a secret from his wife, that he's doing this work for NASA, that Kubrick was kind of telling us what he was doing. And so I think their interpretation from it was that Kubrick was kind of leaking, that maybe he felt guilty. And that's an interesting take on it, but I think it's limited and it's missing out on something because it limits the role of Kubrick to Apollo 11. And as I said before, the movie Shining clearly also indicates 9/11. So that movie, the
How
documentary, it's
so?
good.
How does
Okay,
it
well,
go ahead?
In The Shining, the Danny running down the hall or
Right.
skating down the or
For
tricycling down the hall.
the reasons you mentioned earlier. That's right. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm suggesting here is that there's connections, there's more 9/11 connections in The Shining than there are Apollo 11 connections, I think. Although there are plenty of Apollo 11 connections, and also moreover, the hotel manager at the Overlook Hotel is clearly based on JFK. They chose an actor to look like John F. Kennedy. And
And why
this
is
is
that?
another consistent. Apparently,
His
this is
his
where
role
it
in
gets.
the space missions, like his speech, we choose to
Yeah,
go to the moon.
you got it. You got it. That's exactly what he came up with. Is that Kennedy's connection to this moon landing had him actually in The Shining, and I think there's also something else in the movie uh, Full Metal Jacket. In Full Metal Jacket, you also have a visual reference to 9/11 with this burning tower. And it's also suggested that Joker is actually JFK. And that's why he has the crosshairs on that side of his helmet that he put on there.
Fascinating. And people need to go check out Tim's work. I wish I could catch every single episode. They're hard to track down. He's so censored that his videos are rare at this point. It's hard to find him live. Hopefully, we can get that sorted so we can all catch every episode. But I wanted to ask you about this that you actually, I think, brought to my attention. And this is, let's give credit where credit's due, In Your Face on YouTube. It used to be called Bling Bling, something of the ISS. And you know this video, right, Tim? Of the iPad on the guy's leg, and they zoom in on the reflection, and you can see behind the fourth wall, so to speak. And it's a creepy glimpse behind the scenes. There's this reflection here, and maybe this is a hoax. Maybe she added it, or somebody else added it before she got her hands on it. But what are your thoughts on this? Because this is creepy. It looks like maybe some Easter egg they left there, or is that really what's going on behind the cameras? I mean, this looks like some sort of a droid or something. A druid, I guess is what I mean. With one of these
There are
eyes.
many of them. There are many. I've seen them. And so what you're talking about are the reflections in the black mirrors on all the
Yes.
iPads that the astronauts have strapped on their bodies. And Bling Bling BS of the ISS is a YouTube channel that she specifically found. She sought these out. all of these reflections. And so I looked at these videos and I'm thinking, what do these mean? And they kept making me think about Eyes Wide Shut. And the reason
Definitely.
why is that they look like the masks from the behind the scenes where Tom Cruise's character goes into the secret Illuminati party. So I was thinking, if if I'm right about the space station being a hoax, then the people who are behind the scenes would be the ones behind these masks in the movie that Stanley Kubrick is hinting at, the real controllers, the ones who are managing these various deceptions. So the connection here, though, stood out to me. When I saw that video, I thought, wait a minute, why is there an Eyes Wide Shut connection to the space station when we already have established Kubrick's got some connections to Apollo 11? And that had me re-examining, was Kubrick involved in NASA and how deep does it go? And then this got me looking at Tom Cruise, because then shortly after I noticed this or looked into this demons on the ISS, these masks, I thought, wait, this is interesting, because now Tom Cruise, after having announced the sequel to Top Gun on the 33rd year, they put out Maverick, he announced that he's going to go up into the space station. So I start looking at Tom Cruise, and I find that Tom Cruise spent a lot of time with Stanley Kubrick. And I thought, wait a minute, if Kubrick's legacy is Apollo 11, shaping the worldview of the masses, maybe Tom Cruise is very ambitious, and maybe going to the space station, he's going to do for the space program what Kubrick did. So I was already looking at Cruise suspiciously, like, why is he going to the ISS after he's worked with the guy that faked the moon landing? So I saw this as a connection worth looking at and exploring. And the more I looked, the more I found that Tom Cruise is super integrated with the meta script, with this bigger story. He's got movies where, like Vanilla Sky, where he dies at 33, comes back from the dead. He divorces all his wives at 33. He's done 42 movies. And again, the number 42 tying in with this space station thing. The Top Gun movie to Maverick was 33 years apart.
And his name,
Even
right?
with
His
his
name
name, oh, this is a
means
big one.
crossing. Cruise means to cross,
It,
right? And then what was Tom? Twin?
yeah, so you got twin cross, which means resurrection or second coming. And so in the Metascript book, I was talking about his name being, and I said, you're going to see Tom Cruise likely falling from the sky and this twin cross symbolism. And funnily enough, back in October, Tom Cruise was filming a movie based on World War II, where he was spotted hanging upside down from the sky from a bi-wing plane. And if you look at the picture, it looks like Tom Cruise on a double cross in the sky. Now, I'm saying that this is part of an integrated ritual, and it's foreshadowing for what's to come.
Wow. So, how do you see those two storylines tying together and playing out here? Tom Cruise is going to go shoot a movie on the ISS, they say, and then also we're eyeing this drama with Russia. So you mentioned it earlier. It sounds like we don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but you expect
Actually,
maybe it to be shot out of the sky. And how do you see Tom Cruise playing in with that?
okay, I'm glad you brought that up. So, okay, last summer was 1969 all over again. So 2021 summer was like 1969. We had the race to the moon, the space race. And in 1969, you had the space race, Russia versus America. So this year, last summer, Tom Cruise was racing to the space station to see who could film the first movie in space. The Russian crew going up there were filming a movie called The Challenge, another Challenger reference. The director, there's a few hints about this too, but my main thing is Russia versus America. Tom Cruise is our hero. And hero is a sun god reference. So he represents our side, and the Challenger, of course, well, the movie The Challenge is the Russian movie. So what I'm suggesting is the Challenger explosion to come has been hinted at already, and that Russia beats us, and that's what we were kind of looking at with Tom Cruise going. So he hasn't filmed it yet, but he lost the space race for America versus the Russians. He lost, quote, the challenge. And I don't even think his part of the story is over yet. He's still going up there. And I have found hints in a David Bowie film or a video and a South Pole episode where there's a South Pole episode of Tom Cruise dead on the moon. David Bowie's last video, Black Star, has a dead astronaut on the moon. So there's and then also there's some Tom Cruise predictive programming where he's constantly this world savior, and you can see how he's typecast as this dying, resurrecting Sun King. That's what he was in Vanilla Sky. But again, a couple of things quickly here. In Top Gun, he wears the HGU-33 helmet. And anybody goes to space, they wear the Skywalker X-33 watch. So my point with Tom Cruise too is that he is the Jesus Christ of Scientology. And when you go back into the lineage of the space program, its origin, you've got Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, creator of Scientology. Scientology is not a joke. It's a space religion. And the creator of the space religion was deeply integrated with and in bed with, literally, with the American counterpart to Aleister Crowley. So there's a connection here with Scientology, the movies, occult black magic rituals, and Tom Cruise, and this incoming 9/11 event that's going to come from space.
Wow. And I wanted to ask you, what was I going to ask you? You brought to my attention Mr. Satan is an anagram of Starman. And then we have David Bowie, who you just mentioned. And I was a big fan of David Bowie growing up, and he helped indoctrinate me into the space paradigm with songs like Space Oddity and other ones like that. I can't think of exactly what they're called. And he went by the Starman at one point in his career, I believe. How does he play him? Was he just a useful jester, musician to help them sell this stuff to the people subliminally?
I think on two levels. One, David Bowie's music has tracked along with the progress of the space age from the beginning. They played Space Oddity on BBC during Apollo 11. He's also a Thelemite. So he's of the same cult religion that's really the basis behind the fourth wall of Scientology, behind the fourth wall of NASA. He was a part of that. It's indicated in all of his work. So the song Starman, of course, significant here because Tesla Roadsters, the Tesla Roadster by Elon Musk was sent out into space with a David Bowie song playing. Starman, the guy in the seat was Starman. So this Tesla Roadster has on the dashboard, "Don't Panic." Couple of references here. "Don't Panic" is from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. That's where Musk gets all of his 42 references. But as I said, 42 is actually a reference to Saturn. You could also say that Mr. Satan, being an anagram, is another way of referencing the same thing, because David Bowie is the man who fell to earth, and he wears the lightning bolt on his face. Satan falls like lightning. So you have the Mr. Satan, the man who falls to earth, Tesla Roadster. Interesting symbolism all throughout this entire thing. But the significance to Bowie is the Space Oddity corresponds to Space Odyssey. The main character in Space Odyssey is David Bowman. DB is another 42. So
Wow.
David Bowman equals David Bowie. We are David Bowman collectively as he descends into as he merges with the monolith. So the space age, if you ask me, or this whole space odyssey, is mankind being integrated into the cult of the monolith. We're all being put into a singular one world religion. Has nothing to do with flying to very high places. It's all about the mentally
Science.
putting us into this.
Scientific
Yes, science
dictatorship.
being installed.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, last year at NATO, they had the digital monolith that all the world leaders ogled at.
Did they?
And it says fight. Yeah, you got to look at the digital monolith at NATO. And again, the monolith is from the movie Space Odyssey, 1968. In 2020, monoliths were appearing everywhere. This is why. And what I'm suggesting again here is that David Bowie's music was there to track along with it, just as as a cultural counterpart. And I even think it's like, okay, Space Odyssey, the song, or Space Oddity, was the first music video performed in space. It was Chris Hadfield. Ground Control to Major Tom. Major Tom is probably Major Tom Cruise, if you ask me. I think that's how deep the foreshadowing goes. The story of Tom Cruise in Vanilla Sky as a 33-year-old dying and then being reborn after 3 days, that corresponds to the Twin Towers, 33 years old, burning, and then 13 years later, they open them up. This is a psychodrama that extends across multiple generations. And so that's how big of a scope this thing is. Cruise is just a bit player, but him losing the space race to the Russians in the challenge last year, to me, was foreshadowing that the Russians are going to defeat America in this particular
And
psyop or whatever.
and that segues perfect to our final topic. And I'm sorry for taking extra time. I know your time is very valuable, but thank you for being with us here. Final topic has to do with this Russia onslaught in the news. We keep hearing Russia this, Russia that. We hear Ukraine. That they're just obsessively pushing this topic, and you've been touching on this for a long time now, and it just kind of manifested overnight last week, and I couldn't help but think back to this headline here, which I think is how I want to segue over to that topic and get your takes on these things. You brought this to my attention, and I'll just read it from right here. The Americans drink their urine, the Russians don't. It tastes like bottled water, says the water subsystem manager for the ISS at NASA's Flight Center. As long as you can... okay, so basically they're talking about how they stomach it, but somehow they're telling us that Russians get to drink the filtered water that they bring up with the spaceship, and then the Americans drink filtered urine. And what do you think? Because this seems like a contrived story that doesn't make any sense. What do you think the symbology is here?
Yes, I remember when I first started looking at this, I thought, if this whole thing is fake, then why are they bringing this up? Is it a sick joke? Is it a hazing? But if you look at the subtext, it means something that the Russians they're drinking water in space up there, and the Americans are drinking Russian urine. It's recycled, sure, but when you look at the subtext here, I'm thinking, is America being dominated in space? Is America going to take a fall? Have we lost the space race? Have we already been punked and we don't know it? So I took it to be some kind of, and then also the first time I heard this, Donald Trump was hanging out with an astronaut and Ivanka, and they're talking to the commander, Peg Whitman of the ISS, who spent 666 days in space, by the way. And she's on the screen and she's chugging this thing. And Trump's like, better you than me. And they laughed about how she's drinking the Russian urine. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute. Right before that, the big news of the day was Donald Trump was getting golden showers by Russian prostitutes.
Right.
Shortly before then. And I'm thinking, golden showers from Russians, Americans drinking Russian something. So I kind of read in the subtext there that maybe something was going to go down in space and Russia was going to take over the low Earth orbit domain.
Well, I have somebody who sends me some really interesting thoughts, and just a couple that I got today. They told me climate change is an anagram of chemical agent. So that's a curious one. But they also, when I brought this up, I was telling how you were going to be on the show, and I had some thoughts about the ISS, and one of them that I mentioned was this story. And they sent me an email about the Pi variant, which is something I've been forecasting here and guessing is about to happen. Based on all the conditioning and all the propaganda that I'm seeing with the vaccines and the COVID, it seems like Omicron is conditioning people to everything's proportionate, and you get your rights back if the variant is mild. But then it looks like the Pi variant is going to be more deadly, is my guess. And rapid test, this phrase they always use, rapid test, is an anagram of Pi started. Lots of things like that I've seen. And they sent me this email, though, my long story short, that this story about piss and the ISS could be Pi plus ISS. And I wonder if these two predictions, these two forecasts we have here, are going to collide and be the major news stories in the foreseeable future. So I just wanted to throw that in there. If you want to comment on that, I'd love to hear it. But then I wanted to ask you about the whole situation with Russia. But first, what are your thoughts on that possibility of Pi variant plus the ISS being shot down, or just drama with the ISS together as piss? And this is a contrived piss story.
The world stage is nothing if not entertaining theater, and they're constantly inculcating double meanings, double entendres, and encoded meanings in the names of the different characters. And I'm always pointing this stuff out. Like, there's no way it's the inside jokes are legion with this group. So that wouldn't shock me one bit. Anagrams too. Chemical agent, an anagram for climate change. Well, climate change is 33 years old. So I've been looking closely at that, thinking if there's going to be any kind of simulated event, this will be the year.
They're gearing up for it, for sure. The propaganda.
Speaking of anagrams, you sent me one this morning that Ukraine is an anagram for air nuke.
Yep. And also UK rain, like the UK reigns over the rest of the world. But yeah, air nuke as well. All thanks to that same person who emails me the tips, so shout out to them. But yeah, what are your thoughts on air nuke, Ukraine?
Okay, air nuke stands out to me because when we were first looking at again, notice the date 113. We were looking, and this is before I knew the significance of that date. I didn't know the new tower opened on that date. But again, we were looking at this 113 date and this Seattle predictive programming, and the $100 bill folded up gives you a space needle with what looks to be a burst above it, like a starburst, like a EMP in the sky. So an air nuke. So air nuke actually does seem like it would be part of the story right now, because if there is going to be a nuke, it's going to be an
Can
EMP.
you say that
And
again?
there's
What graphic looked like what you just described?
Yeah, okay, and funnily enough, the last time I brought out the video on this, my internet went down. The $100 bill folded up.
Oh
Like the
yes, I have
$20
that.
bill gives you the Twin Towers, that
Yeah,
would
I
give you the
have that
Space
actually
Needle
right
with an
here.
air nuke.
Oh, there's that one as well. And then there's also the flooding of New York City. Are you aware of this way to fold the $100 bill while I pull up the other one?
Yeah, the $100 bill gets you the flooding of New York, and it gets you the air nuke or the anagrammed Ukraine above the Space Needle in Seattle, which is state 42. I'm sorry, in state 42, Washington. And the Space Needle, by the way, is 42 meters wide. And do you want to guess how many seconds it takes to ascend the elevator in the Space Needle?
113.
42 seconds.
42. Okay. Wow.
And let me run this one by you really quick. On 1-9, there was a 19-story tower, the Northwest Tower, on 1-9 that burned. They say 19 people died. That was the initial report. So 1-9, 19 floors, 19 people, Northwest Tower burns, caused by space heaters. So when I saw that, I'm thinking Northwest, probably a reference to Seattle
Uh
or
huh.
Washington. And I'm thinking space heater, space wars. So a lot of the space war predictive programming we've been seeing has been pointing at the Northwest. And the fire engine that put out the fire was engine number 42, interestingly enough. I had a reporter there on site. So I'm seeing that event on 1-9 as suggesting there's going to be another 9/11. This is a Bronx fire, by the way. The next 9/11 is going to be a space 9/11 as things heat up in space. And then they also said that the space heaters were necessitated by climate change. So there's that angle, because the climate change angle connects to the space war schism here, capitalism versus communism. Communism, of course, being synonymous with the environmentalist green agenda.
And final question, I guess, because we could talk for a long time, and I don't want to steal your time. What do you think about the whole situation with Russia? What can we predict from your analysis coming at it entirely different? And I guess after this, I want to ask you about auto hoaxing. So maybe one more question afterwards. But what are your thoughts about the Russia situation and predictions based on your analysis? Because you come at it in a completely different direction, and I think it's interesting for people to hear what you think is coming next.
Great. Yeah, and yeah, I certainly don't mind. We haven't spoken in a while, and it's about time we've caught up on things. So I'm happy to answer all these questions and respond to any other questions people may have. But yeah, so the phrase auto hoax and the auto hoaxer is somewhat new, but it's about really epistemology. How do you know what you know? Do you assume it's true because it comes through a screen? And I think we can all agree at this point that you can no longer rely on televised news for factual information about reality. So on some level, we're all having to admit that you're going to be a dupe if you just believe everything. So you have to have some level of skepticism. The problem is most people have turned it off, and by default, they trust the news, they trust the screen. So those of us who say, if it's an extraordinary claim, we need evidence, or it's not true to us. We don't have to acknowledge it as true. We're being logically consistent and sound here. But yes, we are automatically assuming it to be a hoax if it's extraordinary without evidence. So that's the approach. And that approach leaves you with a lot of unanswered questions, but it also leaves you without a lot of things to be afraid of that turn out to be hoaxed later. So it's just, to me, it's just reasserting the idea that the burden of proof is on the one offering the most outrageous story. And for so long, the media has been selling us outrageous stories, and people have accepted that burden of proof. And it's not fair. We don't have the um, I don't think we have enough information to even know one way or the other. So it shouldn't even be on us. So with my approach is this, given that I look at all these events as even looking back, we have to question, did that event even happen the way they said? Did as many people die as they say? Because the fake news of today becomes history when it's unchallenged. So when I'm looking at what's coming next, I'm thinking this is all theater to guide us towards this great reset, one world order. That's what it's leading to. The cult of the monolith, this singular worldview with this new religion that they've mostly installed already. And so the atheists have a new, you don't have to believe in God to have this new religion. You got your flood myth, you have your concept of sin reintroduced as the virus, but all the way from top to bottom, they've given us a full worldview. And I think the last part of bringing this in is destroying the challengers to the system. So anybody that stands up to the UN, anybody that stands out as a pariah, even America does, because we're the main polluters. We are the Titanic that will have to sink. And so I kind of think that 9/11 symbolized America being brought to its knees, and 3/11 symbolizes, in many ways, if you look at the pandemic 3/11 as like another 9/11 event, it shows us submitting. So the submission, I think, is also symbolic. The kneeling, which we saw with the BLM, a lot of politicians. I think the act of kneeling represents submission to this one world order. And that's what the new tower represents. The replacement tower they put up on 113. So I think that everyone's being brought to heel. And I think that's what the QAnon story is so important. And really quick, since we talked on about this whole Kubrick thing and Kennedy, we cannot separate Q from the Kennedys. And the Q story is, if you ask me, it's as old as 9/11, which is why I don't trust it. And so there's a subtext, a story with this whole Q thing that involves the Kennedy family. And again, I think this is all part of a myth that was constructed decades ago. But my point is, the bigger overall drama is that the challengers to the system have to fall. So whatever happens with Russia, whether they simulate an EMP, whatever they do, I'm assuming it to be fake until proven real. If they tell us there's fallout and you can't leave your house without a mask, I'm going to assume it to be as real as the 2020 thing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, let me ask you, because I'm sure a lot of people are curious about this question. And also I want to ask you, and this will be the final question afterwards, about your work and your mission. And, I know you're into print and also radio and video streaming. So I want to hear what you're up to these days and what you're planning. But I wanted to ask you about, how do you see this whole world theater being orchestrated? And I know we've touched on this a little bit, but, basically they're all puppets and they're just the actors that we see on the screens. And then the writers and directors are behind the scenes planning the whole thing, but we don't know who they are. And it's all scripted. Is that the general idea? They're all on the same team. How do you see this, power complex hierarchy actually getting things done behind the scenes?
Well, for one, I think everything's on a need to know basis. So people will say they couldn't have faked Apollo 11 because there were 150,000 or so contractors, they'll say, involved. Well, not everybody has to know. If you look at an actual movie, who actually knows the words that the actors are going to speak in the final scene outside of the director and those actors? The stagehands don't have any information about this. So I'm saying that there's levels of the stagehands stratification, and just like with the military, you have security clearances. And I think our world is run by security clearance societies or secret societies. And this need to know basis is necessary for the integrity of the whole thing. So I'm suggesting that most of the people are playing bit parts, and that the world stage is, and this is the biggest secret of all, and this is why I think it's important to make a distinction between fake and false flag. What this all gives away is that there is some kind of monolithic control over world media that has allowed the MSM, bipartisan media, to become the de facto world church. And I think that's what's going on now. I think that the old religions are being replaced by this new technocratic religion. And I think it's important to the powers that be that they retain total editorial control. And so right now they're involved in censoring the people who are questioning the news as being real, but they're allowing certain types of conspiracies. So for example, you can talk about aliens all day, But if you say aliens are fake and the earth is flat, you get censored. Why is that? So I'm just saying that, yeah, the bigger agenda here is that there is a monolithic world church that has actually disguised itself as many different decentralized media organizations. And to the extent that a media organization is not independent or that it's basing its stories on established lies, they're just extensions of the same. So you don't even have to know that you're working for Big Brother or that you are Big Brother to be a part of it. You just have to go with the default interpretation of major world events.
So it's all compartmentalized, and if people stick their necks out, they get thrown off to the side. So it's just a big grooming process, and everyone just keeps doing their simple tasks that they're assigned without seeing the big picture, and they're rewarded probably handsomely. So they just go along with the flow, and if they stop, then they get weeded out. Basically, what you're saying.
Precisely. And one other thing, I think all of this stuff is planned long in advance, and I think whoever's behind this, their symbolism is constantly referencing astrological bodies and ancient deities or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The cult that runs the world is astrotheological and everything's timed in the stars. I don't think it's a coincidence, therefore, that the conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn, the great conjunction on the solstice in 2021, I think that event was 100% tied into this World Economic Forum's Great Reset.
Wow.
That it was timed around that they had the great conjunction of Jupiter Saturn. The significance of that is that the last time we had a Jupiter Saturn conjunct on a winter solstice was when Christ was supposedly born. So here we are, the year 2020, and we have a great conjunction, and then we have this great reset. So we start 2021, all the talks about build back better. Not a coincidence when you look at the World Economic Forum and their 666 logo, or even build back better. You know,
And it's
spell
the
it with
same as
lowercase.
rebuilding American defenses. Same kind of idea. The phoenix rising out of the ashes, right?
100%. The Phoenix rising out of the ashes. And one more thing on that, because this Phoenix thing is very important. When you looked at the inauguration, you saw Lady Gaga dressed up like something from the Hunger Games,
Right.
wearing a dove on her shirt with the olive branch. Well, the dove with the olive branch represents the post flood, a post reset. After the flood, the dove brings the olive branch to Noah to say, hey, you can go back. So the dove is actually another way of representing the phoenix. Look at the Hunger Games, and she was wearing the Hunger Games uniform, and look at the Mockingjay. You have a phoenix with an arrow in its mouth. Same symbol. It's about burning down or flooding and building back after. So the symbol of the phoenix is the symbol of the cult that, in my view, the cult that runs the world. And the way they run it is cyclical revolution, burning down so nobody else can keep up with them, and they build back on the ashes. And I think that's been indicated again and again in their symbolism, and that's why we have the phoenix so prevalent in these major situations like 9/11, where they're burning down our world and building back, quote, better.
Wow. And every line and every point you bring up, it just reminds me of 10 other great points I've heard you say over the years. And I just can't recommend your channel enough to people out there. Check out the link in the description, everybody. What's your mission these days, Tim? And what medium are you using? And what's your next step? Like what projects or main project are you looking into next?
Right now, I'm getting Infinite Plane. So Infinite Plane Radio is really the voice of the Infinite Plane Society, which is the think tank of researchers. And we have had this pool of researchers, as you know, you've been a participant going back several years. So the Infinite Plane Society, you could consider it to be the philosophical movement, the art movement, or the meme pool. But Infinite Plane Radio is where I do this. But now I'm getting into print. So the next step forward is print newspaper twice a month. And what I want to do is I want to create a news organization that is solely based on a post-world stage perspective. So it's not AP. It's those who don't believe AP. So it'll be 100% pure skepticism, completely bannable on the internet. And it's not even what they say is it's hate speech or it's malinformation. But the truth is what we're doing, I think, is really just an in-depth critique of the world stage. And so I want to get all these post-world stage perspectives into a newspaper format. So I'll be doing interviews I'll be getting other writers involved. But yeah, I want to maintain this and expand it. And not only expand it, but I have hundreds of press passes that I've issued ever since they said that you have to stay home for COVID unless you're essential, and media are essential. So I turned Infinite Plane Media into an organization with reporters everywhere. So yeah, I see this as a long-term endeavor to exist as an independent media organization, and completely ignoring all terms of service from all of the government controlled platforms.
And I'm a regular listener, and I just learned something new before we started. You were telling me that you have a pretty good archive on all these different podcast sites, and the updates are still flowing through those channels. Is that right? Is that the place to go for people who want to get up to speed real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. What I have done is I realized that the video sites are 100% compromised, and they're very easy to censor, but podcasting is a place where free speech still exists, which is why I think that Joe Rogan is being roasted, because I think he's look, this is a little short side note, but you can look into this. Last year, when Joe Rogan was being called out as someone who needed to be canceled, they pulled 42 tracks from Spotify. And as I said before, the number 42 is always associated with falling, people falling from grace, even. So I saw that and I said, watch, something's going down with Joe Rogan. Well, fast forward, they pulled 71 more tracks, and now he's got 113 tracks pulled.
Wow.
And remember, I said the number 42 is used with the racial psyops? Well, specifically, Kaepernick's attorney assembled 24 instances of Joe using the N word and put that into a compilation. So he went from 42 tracks banned to 113. 113, again, burning down the old, building back. I think this is iconoclasm, and they're destroying what Joe Rogan represents: toxic masculinity, free speech, all that dangerous stuff. Anyway, it's in the numbers. And so I'm just saying again that, as you've noticed, we've been observing these patterns, these numbers, and it tells a story. And so if anybody wants to catch up with what I'm on, what we're talking about anytime, I moved from just the video sites to the podcasting platforms. And so for the time being, before Joe ruins it, it's still relatively uncensored. So if you search Infinite Plane Radio, you'll find us on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Apple, Audible, pretty much any podcasting platform, dozens of them. We're on all of them, and it's always up to date.
I remember I used to go to your Anchor page. Does that still have the posts as well? Is that how you publish them out?
Yes. Yes, Anchor as well. Anchor, SoundCloud, Infinite Plane Radio. So what I did was this. I realized they're going to block us on on Facebook and on YouTube. So if you just expand laterally across as many platforms as you can, you'll just be findable. So Infinite Plane Radio is infinitely findable. You can't not find us if you search.
I need to track you down, and I recommend everyone else do the same. I've been missing your analysis. You can just rattle off all these interesting insights just for 2 or 3 hours. You take phone calls, which is always really fun, and you do a great job. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining us. Any final words you want to leave the people with? It seems like more people are in the chat than ever right now. People keep showing up and sticking around, so more than the whole rest of the stream. So any words for the people out there?
I would say this. We have been following the news since 2019 with it's beyond skepticism. We're analyzing the storylines, the subtext, and the narratives. And so to me, I feel like this is Mystery Science Theater 3000, captive audience forced to watch bad science fiction to drive us crazy. And we're the ones who weren't driven crazy. The masses of people who believe it are the ones who have been effectively processed. So my final thought would be this. I think it's important to maintain networks of people who see through the haze. And that's what these chat rooms are for. That's what you do. And I think it's important that we continue to network, because the numbers of us that see through it at this level, it's growing, but we're not integrated. And so we shouldn't have to by default go listen to some bullshit artist like, this sellout or that sellout, when they don't understand even the basics of crisis actors or psyops. So anyway, yeah, to really see through the world stage, I think you need to be with people who are on the level of auto hoaxing, which is again one of these things they try to stamp out auto hoaxing. I was kicked out of was it Paul Joseph Watson? I was kicked out of one of his chats. I was blocked for being called. He called me an auto hoaxer. So mainstream conspiracy theorists don't like this level of radical skepticism. So I intend to maintain it, obviously. So anyway, yeah, thanks for having me on. We'll have to do a follow-up after whatever goes down goes
Yep.
down.
Yeah.
Also, keep an eye on the 4th. The moon's going to be hit by some big
That's
piece of
tomorrow?
junk tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Okay, we'll check. We'll keep an eye on the moon and an eye on the ISS. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining us. Keep up the great work, man, and really appreciate you.
Likewise, I've been a big listener and supporter on Patreon of yours, and I've been following you since, well, 2019. And pleasure to speak with you. Have a great day.
All right, have a good one, man. Bye.
All right, everyone out there on